what if I told you that your empathy, this deep ability to feel others, might not be a gift, but a scar? You feel everything. The atmosphere, the silences, the looks that others don't even notice. You anticipate conflicts. You know what someone needs before they even say it, and often you give more than you have. But why? Carl Jung, father of analytical psychology, uncovered something profoundly unsettling. The empath is not simply born sensitive. They are conditioned to survive through sensitivity. That impulse to help, to heal, to erase yourself to keep the peace, may not be altruism. It may be the result of a childhood where you learned your emotions were too much, your silence was safety, and your presence was only accepted when useful. Now you find yourself exhausted, sometimes resentful, surrounded by unbalanced relationships, and still unable to say no. You feel like you have to be okay for others to be okay. That's not compassion, that's emotional hypervigilance. Jung called this early ego adaptation, a defense mechanism as sophisticated as it is invisible, one that shapes the false self we carry for decades. But here's the turning point. Jung didn't see empaths as fragile. He saw them as souls, midway through individuation, the psychological journey toward becoming who you truly are, beyond the masks of survival. In this video, we'll walk this path together. We'll uncover why your empathy hurts, why it pulls you away from yourself, and how Jung proposed you reclaim what he called the sacred ego, the capacity to exist fully without asking for permission. The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. C.G. Jung. If you've spent your life caring for everyone but yourself, comment below, "I am ready to remember myself." And before we dive in, like this video, subscribe, and hit the notification bell. This content is for awakening souls, and you might be the turning point in someone's life by sharing this message. Chapter 1. The Myth of the Empathic Gift, when empathy is survival programming. You've heard that being an empath is a spiritual gift, that your sensitivity is a rare blessing, but what if it's actually the reflection of a childhood where love meant vigilance, where emotional connection was the only way to stay safe? Carl Jung deconstructed this romanticized idea. He saw that behind many empathetic adults was a hyper-attentive child, not because they wanted to be, but because they had to. The empath is often the child forced to feel what adults could not express. It's the child who learned to read a father's mood by the sound of his footsteps in the hallway, the one who measured the home's climate by the mother's silence, the one who stayed quiet to avoid causing trouble, the one who anticipated others' pain to prevent explosions. That is not natural empathy. That is emotional hypervigilance, an unconscious defense mechanism that rewires the nervous system for survival. Neuroscience confirms Jung. When a child grows up in emotionally unstable environments, the brain develops networks of alert and monitoring. The amygdala, center of fear, stays on constant guard. The prefrontal cortex, responsible for self-care and emotional discernment, is overloaded. The child doesn't learn to feel themselves. They learn to feel for others. The problem, it persists into adulthood. The empath becomes a walking detector of tension. They capture subtleties in tone, expression, subtext, but lose themselves in the process. As Jung said, the soul shrinks when you are forced to adapt too much. This empathy is not a choice. It's a compulsion. It's the automatic replay of a learned role, the emotional mediator, the one who resolves, calms, exhausts themselves, and is rarely cared for. But here is where transformation begins. Jung believed that everything compulsive hides a wound, and every wound holds, in its shadow, the power to heal. What we call empathy may actually be the body's memory of a system that only felt safe by erasing itself. If this resonates with you, write in the comments, "I am not just sensitive, I was trained to survive by feeling." Chapter 2. The Empath's Shadow, What You Were Forced to Repress. Empathy hurts not because of what you feel, but because of what you were forbidden to feel. Carl Jung, paraphrased. From an early age, you learned to be the good one, the understanding one, the listener, the caretaker. But at what cost? Jung called this the formation of the shadow through moral conditioning. In other words, everything a child learns is wrong, selfish, or inappropriate gets banished into the hidden parts of the unconscious. But what was repressed isn't evil. It's vital force. It's your natural self-expression. The empath, more than any other psychic type, buries essential parts of themselves: legitimate anger, the desire to say no, the will to put themselves first, the freedom to set boundaries, the need to be seen, not just useful. Jung observed that by repressing these forces, the empath develops a false self, a persona so adapted to serving that it forgets to exist. And here lies the paradox. The more light you offer others, the darker the part of you that carries your truth becomes. This silent, invisible shadow starts to manifest over time, in abusive relationships, in chronic feelings of exhaustion, in identity crises, in an inexplicable guilt for wanting to have a life of your own. Carl Jung was clear: what you deny submits you, what you accept transforms you. For empaths, the shadow is not something evil. It's made up of everything you were never allowed to be. What Jung called sacred selfishness, the ability to affirm yourself without guilt. But why is that so difficult? Because you were conditioned to associate love with adaptation, and so you learn to trade truth for acceptance. The consequence: you become an expert in the pain of others, but a beginner in your own inner world. The good news? The shadow doesn't want to destroy you. It wants to give you back to yourself. It holds your courage to say no, your right to rest, your steady voice, your desire to be loved for who you are, not for what you provide. If you've ever felt guilty for putting your own feelings first, write in the comments: "My shadow is not weakness, it is my denied right." Chapter 3. The Wounded Healer, When Helping Turns into Self-Denial. The empath who does not heal turns into a martyr, and that is not love, it is exhaustion in disguise. Carl Jung, paraphrased. Have you ever felt a quiet anger, even while helping? A fatigue that doesn't come only from physical tiredness, but from the soul itself. That's what Jung called the principle of psychic compensation, the unconscious tendency to try to balance what is out of balance in the conscious mind. In the empath, this compensation often shows up as hidden resentment. They give, but feel used. They care, but feel forgotten. They support others, but collapse inside. The pain. It isn't only in giving too much, it's in never having received enough. This is neuropsychological. When the nervous system learns that love only comes when you are useful, it transforms usefulness into identity. You become the counselor, the informal therapist, the savior, but never the one who is saved. And as Jung said, what you do repeatedly becomes you, even if it destroys you. And here comes the archetype of the wounded healer, inspired by the myth of Chiron, the centaur who healed everyone but himself. Jung saw in this symbol the empath who compulsively heals not by choice, but by lack. They need to be needed in order to feel worthy. They need to solve others' conflicts to avoid facing their own inner emptiness. But this is a trap, because the more you give of yourself without replenishing, the more you become a dry channel. And whoever gives from a place of scarcity unknowingly feeds their own wound. And the empath's wound often has a name: self-abandonment. It's hard to accept this, because the outside narrative is that you're too good, generous, spiritual. But the inner truth may scream, I just wanted to be seen. I just wanted someone to care for me the way I care for others. Jung did not see this as weakness, but as a turning point. The healer's cure begins when they understand it is not their duty to carry the world. It begins when they recognize their own pain as valid and stop using it as a lens to save others. If you've ever felt like you had to take care in order to deserve love, write in the comments, "I see myself now. I don't need to erase myself to exist." Chapter 4. The Call to Individuation, From Survivor to Authentic Being. You are not in crisis. You are in birth. Carl Jung. There comes a moment in the empath's life when something breaks. That old drive to help no longer sustains them. Others' pain, once so natural to carry, now weighs like stones. People call them changed, cold, selfish, but deep down they feel something different. A silent urgency to remember who they are, not who they were trained to be. Jung called this moment the crisis of individuation. It's when the psyche can no longer tolerate living inside a false self. It's the collapse of the adapted persona, the end of the perfect helper mask. It's not depression, it's the beginning of liberation. The symptoms? A sudden disinterest in others' pain, a deep fatigue, not of the body but of the role you've been playing, a contained anger you can no longer deny, the feeling that everything that once defined you no longer makes sense. This is the moment when, as Jung said, the soul revolts against the abandonment of the self. Individuation is this explosive and sacred process of letting the character you once were die so the real you can be born. But it's frightening, because the empath was conditioned to validate themselves through others' pain. And when that pain is no longer central, what's left? What remains is the void. But it is in that void that the new self begins to breathe. This new self carries what Jung called the transcendence of opposites. You don't need to choose between being caring and self-caring, between compassion and boundaries. The individuation journey is about integrating these opposites, the me who feels the other with the me who feels myself first. It's not about becoming selfish, it's about no longer being invisible to yourself. Jung stated, "Who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakens." If you're going through this existential void, where everything that once mattered has lost its shine, comment, "I am in rebirth. I am not lost. I am returning to myself." Chapter 5. The Sacred Ego, the Redemption of Selfishness. The healthy individual loves themselves as much as they love others. Carl Jung. Why do we feel guilty when we say no? Why, even when exhausted, do we keep ourselves available? Why do we feel that resting, prioritizing ourselves, or having needs is wrong? Because we were taught that thinking of ourselves is selfish. But Jung made a crucial distinction. There is a toxic selfishness, and there is a sacred selfishness. He called it healthy selfishness, the ability to affirm your own worth, to protect your boundaries, to care for your soul with the same devotion you give to others. The empath, by denying this, becomes a compulsive giver. And as Jung observed, everything that is one-sided in the psyche becomes sick. The empath without a sacred ego falls into a toxic cycle. Help too much, burn out, feel guilty for pulling back, return to helping, get sick, repeat. But what happens when they start to say, enough? When they start to choose themselves? People complain. They say the empath has changed, but in truth they've only just begun to exist. Neuroscience supports Jung here. Studies show that the brain of those who practice healthy boundaries develops areas linked to emotional self-regulation, self-esteem, and clarity of identity. And the most curious part? When the empath activates their sacred ego, they actually become more effective, more present, more authentic, because now they help by choice, not compulsion. They give from abundance, not from lack. They love without losing themselves. Jung called this ethical service the ability to give without destroying yourself. It's when you discover that caring for yourself is an act of spiritual maturity, not selfishness. If you've ever felt guilty for prioritizing yourself, write in the comments, "My self-care is sacred and this is how I honor my existence." Chapter 6. Real relationships or functional bonds. The meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed. Carl Jung. When the empath begins to reconnect with themselves, something deeply symbolic happens. Relationships change, and not out of whim, but because the empath stops operating as a function, the advisor, the caretaker, the eternal listener. And then painful questions arise. Who am I when I am not fixing others? Who stays by my side when I stop pleasing? How many of my relationships existed only because I never set boundaries? Jung called this unconscious projection, when others don't relate to who you are, but to the role you perform. It's shocking to realize many people connected to your service, not your soul. When you stop erasing yourself, some react with anger, manipulation, or distance. This is not rejection, it is revelation. Jung named this process relational recalibration. It's when the psyche, becoming more whole, demands that bonds also become more authentic. And that hurts, because empaths often have deep ties with people who are emotionally wounded and dependent. When the empath begins to change, the dynamic shifts. And as Jung said, those who resist your individuation were the ones who benefited from your self-erasure. But there's another side. The relationships that can't stand your authenticity were never love. The ones that flourish alongside your transformation are the ones that were meant to be real. Jung observed that healthy relationships require what he called psychological differentiation, the ability to be together without fusing, to love without absorbing, to care without carrying. That's why, as they become whole, empaths stop attracting codependents and begin to attract equals. If you've ever realized that some relationships only existed while you erased yourself, write in the comments, "Now, I only stay where I can be whole." Chapter 7. The integrated empath, feeling with awareness, loving with boundaries. True compassion does not require self-annihilation. It is born from wholeness, not from the wound. Carl Jung, paraphrased. After walking through the shadow, releasing the role of the wounded healer, and facing the solitude of individuation, the awakened empath finds something extraordinary, the ability to choose their own sensitivity, no longer as survival, but as awareness. Carl Jung called this functional transcendence, the ability to unite seemingly irreconcilable opposites, care and boundaries, sensitivity and sovereignty, love and freedom. The integrated empath develops three central virtues. Emotional choice. They learn that feeling everything is not an obligation. They can turn their empathy on and off, based on reality, not guilt. They feel without dissolving. Compassionate detachment. They understand that compassion is not carrying someone else's burden. They approach with love, but without fusion. They support without erasing themselves. Affective reciprocity. They only give themselves where there is true emotional exchange. They love without losing themselves. Science supports this. Neuroplasticity shows it is possible to rewire automatic empathic patterns. The practice of mindfulness, therapeutic journaling, and emotional reprogramming all strengthen the insular cortex, the region linked to conscious empathy, self-regulation, and self-care. Jung said, "You cannot touch the soul of another unless you are anchored in your own." The integrated empath becomes a channel of healing, not out of obligation, but because now they are full of themselves. In the best sense, they love with presence, they help with boundaries, and they preserve themselves with wisdom. If you are at this point in your journey, where you are beginning to choose what you feel and how you share your energy, write in the comments. My empathy is now awareness, not compulsion. Conclusion: the freedom to feel without losing yourself. Empathy is not the end, it is the beginning. What you do with it is what transforms. Carl Jung, paraphrased. You are not weak for feeling. You are strong for continuing to feel, even when the world tried to silence your heart. But now you know. Your empathy no longer has to be the golden prison that makes you disappear to keep others well. It can and must be a conscious choice, a sacred gesture, an authentic offering born from someone who knows themselves, honors themselves, and cares for themselves. The empath's journey is not about hardening. It is about becoming whole. Jung called this individuation, the union between the sensitivity you never lost and the boundaries you were never allowed to build. You were not made to sacrifice yourself endlessly. You were made to exist fully and to offer the world your entire presence, not your useful absence. Final practices for the conscious empath. Archetypal journaling. Write a letter to the child within you who learned to feel in order to survive. Tell them, now you can exist without fear. I see you. I care for you. Sacred boundary. Meditation. Visualize a light surrounding your body. This light does not isolate you. It defines you. Breathe and repeat. I love without erasing myself. I feel without losing myself. Daily affirmations. My empathy is a choice, not a debt. My boundaries are bridges, not walls. I don't need to break to be loved. If this video touched you, comment below. I choose to care for myself with the same compassion I've always given to others. Like, subscribe, and share with someone who needs this truth. And if you wish to continue this journey of inner awakening, don't stop here. Watch next. Why you lost joy in things, the emptiness after awakening. There we explore how spiritual growth transforms even your hobbies, and what that reveals about your soul. Jung said, the most terrifying thing is to accept yourself completely, but that is where true healing begins. You are not too much, you are whole, and the world needs whole people, not just useful ones. Until the next dive, see you in the next dimension of consciousness.